I'm Nicole Johnston, and you're listening to 7am. The war in the Middle East has sent Australia's fuel prices soaring. And people are worried that if the battle between the US, Israel and Iran continues for another month, Australia may have to begin rationing fuel. Drivers are panic buying, stockpiling, and some petrol stations are running dry. Meanwhile, global oil supplies are under threat as Iran attacks tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. Today, Tim Buckley, the Director of Climate Energy Finance, on how high the price of fuel could go and what does it mean for the cost of living. It's Tuesday, March 17.
With Australian fuel prices creeping up to almost $4 a litre in some parts of the country, panic is setting in.
Just how high will the cost of fuel go?
We are hearing about panic buying. We are hearing about long queues.
Shortfalls across regional Australia driven by a spike in demand.
Since the war began, the unleaded daily average bumped up by 50 cents a litre. The average for diesel even higher.
Tim, we've been hearing all these stories. People are stockpiling fuel, panic buying, rationing. And in some regions, they're even running out of fuel. Stations are going dry. The Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, he's been urging Australians to try and stay calm.
Our fuel supply is continuing to come in. Australians should know that. That's what we've been saying. When we say fuel supply is secure, that's what we say, that's what we mean, that's the facts.
But could you describe for us what's really happening across the country with these fuel prices and how worried should we all be?
We should be worried. There is a major war that America has invoked in the Middle East, and 20% of the world's oil and LNG supplies come through the straits in the Middle East. And how long that war is going to last is anyone's guess. Australia has upwards of 30 days of reserves, and supply globally is still occurring. But the longer the war goes on, the bigger the disruption, the more threat to Australia's fuel security. So at the end of the day, we are 90% reliant on imported oil and diesel. So we are critically exposed. And if all of our supplies, all of our imports were cut off, we would run out entirely within a month if we don't move to an emergency footing.
Today, after careful consideration, we are adjusting the minimum stock obligation for diesel and fuel to enable companies to better handle and better manage their supply chain.
Last week, the government announced the release of that extra 100 million litres of oil a month into the system. Where does that come from, and is it really going to make any difference?
Well, the good news is, so Energy Minister Bowen has released some of our stockpiles, and that stockpile, thanks to the federal Albanese government, is actually held in Australia. It's worth noting that previous Energy Minister Angus Taylor actually built stockpiles in America, which would have served Australia absolutely zero value in terms of an emergency like today. But as the Energy Minister Bowen has highlighted last week, we have upwards of 30 days of reserves across the refineries in Australia, and that will be progressively released. The stockpiles will be reduced in order to make sure that the temporary surge in demand, as people do fill everything up, is covered, and that we continue as relatively as per normal as possible in the middle of a war in the Middle East.
And could you tell us a bit about what other countries are trying to do to reduce demand?
Well, it's interesting. The Philippines last week introduced 4-day working weeks. Other Asian countries are talking about requesting workers work from home. There has been suggestions that all non-essential government travel should be curtailed. So there are measures that can be done, but at the moment, supply is not threatened to that extent, but who knows how long this war is going to go for. So we probably should be contemplating that. I'm sure the federal energy minister is talking with his state counterparts and contemplating exactly those sort of things. We should be cutting down to essential transport only.
And Tim, we're getting all of these reports. Petrol prices up 20 to 30% since the war started. Diesel 30, 40%. How much worse can this get if it drags on? And along with just drivers, what are the other industries in Australia that are going to be really hard hit? Because, of course, we rely on fuel for everything.
Correct. And prior to this war, we were importing upwards of $50 billion a year of diesel and oil. We today, because the price has just gone up by 50%, we're importing upwards of $75 billion a year of oil. Ultimately, we've seen the oil price internationally rise by 50% to around $100 a barrel. But there were indications in Asia over the weekend that the spot price had hit $140. So it is quite feasible that the oil price we are paying, the diesel price we are paying, will go up materially and will stay elevated while there is a war in the Middle East. That's almost inevitable. Other industries are definitely going to be affected. At the end of the day, oil and diesel, unfortunately, are critical for our transport, our freight transport. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of railway transport, so all of our groceries and all of our agricultural products are moved mostly by road, and so the freight industry is going to be impacted. Our mining industry runs almost 100% on imported diesel, both for the equipment and then remote power.
But Tim, at the petrol pump, how high do you think the price could go if this keeps going on the way it is?
It's anyone's guess, but certainly prices could double from where they were only a month ago. And that then has serious systemic implications because, as we just discussed, that goes into grocery prices, that goes into agricultural prices. And so that will then feed into general inflation. And the Treasurer last week talked about inflation, which hit a recent high of 3.8% year on year, could get up to 5%. And as soon as inflation goes up, interest rates will go up. So the cost of living, the cost of mortgages, the cost of rent, all of that could easily be dramatically affected. So I'm not trying to be overly alarmist, but at the end of the day, there will be a serious hit to the Australian economy. There will be a serious hit to the cost of living for everyday Australians. And all of this from a US president who thought he could win a war against a major foreign power in the space of a week. He did not brief Australia. He did not brief anyone. He didn't prepare. He didn't stockpile. So we are very, very exposed. And I think, to me, that's the critical lesson we should take. Never let a disaster go to waste. We need to learn from it. We need to actually adopt new technologies and ensure that we put Australia on a path to a permanent reduction to our addiction to imported fossil fuels.
Coming up, how to prepare for the world's next big oil crisis. Tim, if we could take a look at the bigger picture. Now, we know that all of this is happening because Iran's effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz, that narrow strait where 20% of the world's oil and gas supplies pass through. Could you take us through why this is one of the most important choke points in the world and what is actually happening there right now?
So the Strait of Hormuz is a bottleneck. It controls the sea lanes primarily of Iran, Iraq, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. And more than or almost 20% of the world's oil and LNG, liquid natural gas, is exported through that choke point. Now, ultimately, 20% is a huge reduction. The ability of the world to reduce oil demand by 20% is minimal. There are some alleviating factors. Ironically, Iran's oil refineries are still producing at full capacity, and Iran is not attacking its own oil tankers. So Iran, one of the biggest oil producers in the world, is still exporting through that strait despite the bottleneck. There are also two overland pipelines. There's one across Saudi Arabia, which is about 5 million barrels of oil equivalent per day, compared to, say, the 20 million barrels of oil per day going through the straits. So 5 million can go across Saudi Arabia and be exported through a port that's not affected. But it's an unsustainable situation where we are addicted to imported oil, and that oil is going to cost us a significant amount more, whether it's the 50% we're already seeing or potentially 100 or 200% compared to where it was a month ago.
An early morning strike on Iran's Karg Island has added further uncertainty to the movement of oil from the Gulf.
Over the weekend, we had the US target Karg Island, where Iran exports most of its oil from. Now, it only hit the military installations, but what impact would that have if the US decided to go after their energy infrastructure there?
Well, the impact for the rest of the world, for including America, is extreme. And so if America decides to attack Iranian oil production, the ability, not only would that immediately push the oil price up dramatically, but it would then, for a long period of time, reduce Iran's exports of oil. So even if the war then stopped a week later, the ability of the Iranian industry to actually get back on its feet and start exporting, in other words, so that oil prices go back down to where they were a month ago, would be pushing it out for 6, 12, 18 months. So America's got to be very, very careful. But then at the end of the day, America's got President Trump in control. And he was bragging over the weekend that America is self-sufficient and a net exporter of oil and gas, and that America's sitting there profiteering from the war. The Financial Times over the weekend highlighted that Exxon and Chevron, the US oil industry, will make an extra $60 billion of gross profit if oil prices stay where they are today for the rest of this year. I would argue it's war profiteering, while we all wear the cost, as does the civilians in Iran. And at the end of the day, the more there is instability in the Middle East, the higher fossil fuel prices will go.
Well, first, an honest appraisal of exactly what is coming into the nation and what needs to be used, and if it requires rationing in the cities, we're not saying you can't have fuel, but you have to limit it and say, look, there's 50 litres a week.
Finally, Tim, some politicians are talking about fuel rationing, and clearly this crisis is showing no signs of easing. So what is it that the government should do now to make sure that we're not exposed like this for the next big shock?
I would love to see the Australian government, at the moment, they provide an $11 billion a year subsidy to imported diesel in Australia, a subsidy which undermines our energy security, it undermines our energy independence, and it undermines our climate ambitions. The idea that we're subsidising our addiction to imported fossil fuels, to me, is ridiculous. We should be deploying the solutions, accelerate the deployment of electric vehicles in our road transport, both freight and consumer transport, and in our mining sector. BHP and Rio have been quoted last year as saying the technology doesn't exist, and I'll call rubbish on that. In China, in the month of December, 54% of all heavy-duty trucks in China were electric vehicles. The technology has changed. They are available. This month, Rio and its partners in Guinea, in Sindamu, are deploying 400 hybrid electric vehicle trucks. BHP in Escondida in Chile, the biggest copper mine in the world, rolled out 100% renewable energy power for their grid back in 2022. So what's different? Why did BHP do it in Chile? Why is Rio doing it in Guinea, but they're not doing it in Australia? The answer is an $11 billion subsidy a year to keep our addiction to imported diesel. We need to actually adopt new technologies and ensure that we put Australia on a path to a permanent reduction to our addiction to imported fossil fuels. We should have done it 5 years ago. So measures that were hypothetically possible 5 years ago are entirely commercially viable today. We need to actually respond to this crisis and permanently reduce our addiction to imported oil. And I think Treasurer Chalmers really needs to use this crisis and hold BHP and Rio to account and get a Team Australia approach going. It's not going to change things overnight, but it means that next time we have a war and oil prices go through the roof, and there will be a next time and a time after that, we'll be far, far less exposed.
Tim, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank Thank you very much.
Also in the news, the federal government says it will not send an Australian warship to the Middle East. US President Donald Trump has been trying to rally countries, including China, France, Japan and the UK, to send ships to the Strait of Hormuz in an effort to protect oil tankers. So far, no one has answered his call. And the Australian Communications and Media Authority has slapped new conditions on the radio network behind Kyle and Jackie O. The move comes in response to repeated breaches by the pair, who recently split after an on-air fight. The regulator now has greater powers to punish ARN, which owns Kiss FM, including the power to suspend or cancel their broadcasting licence. I'm Nicole Johnston. This is 7am. Thanks for listening.